Saddam Hussein al-Majid al-Tikriti was born on April 28, 1937, in the small village of Al-Awja near Tikrit, in central Iraq. His birth occurred during a time of instability. The country had just shed the British Mandate, and the new monarchy lacked a strong foundation. Iraq remained divided by tribal, religious, and ethnic lines, all of which would later shape Saddam's vision of rigid centralized authority with no tolerance for dissent. His childhood was marked by humiliation, fear, and poverty. Saddam never met his biological father. He disappeared before Saddam was born. His mother, Suba Tulfa al-Musalat, suffered a breakdown after losing her older son and husband and even attempted abortion or suicide when she discovered she was pregnant with Saddam. These events left deep psychological scars on the future dictator. His stepfather, Hassan al-Ibrahim, was a cruel man who regularly beat and humiliated the boy. At age 10, Saddam fled to live with his uncle Karala Tulfa, an army officer and fervent Arab nationalist who hated the British, Jews, and Shia Muslims. Under his influence, Saddam was introduced to politics, propaganda, and the power of violence as a tool of control. Karala became his mentor and father figure. In Baghdad, Saddam received a secondary education and gradually became involved in political activism. In the early 1950s, he joined nationalist groups and by 1957, the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party. This party combined pan-Arabism, anti-imperialism, socialism, and a cult of strength. Saddam was drawn to the ideology. It legitimized violence in the name of a great Arab nation. In 1959, at the age of 22, Saddam participated in a plot to assassinate Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Karim Qasim. The plan involved ambushing Qasim's motorcade. The attack was carried out, but Qasim survived despite serious injuries, and several conspirators were killed or captured. Saddam managed to flee to Syria and later to Egypt, where he lived under the protection of local Baathists. There, he briefly studied law at Cairo University. His time in Egypt deepened his political fanaticism. At the time, Egypt was experiencing a wave of authoritarian nationalism under Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser became Saddam's ideal model of a leader, charismatic, ruthless, populist. For the first time, Saddam began to see himself not just as a party member, but as a future ruler capable of unifying Iraq with an iron fist. In 1963, another military coup took place in Iraq. The Ba'ath Party briefly seized power, and Saddam returned home. But their rule was short-lived. Within months, the party lost control and its members were persecuted. Saddam was arrested and imprisoned. It was in prison that he began building his own network of influence among future party elites. He became more than just a follower. He was now a strategist, organizer, and manipulator. His image as a leader began to take shape behind bars, within a system of violence, betrayal, and ruthless ambition. He was released in 1966. Just 2 years later, in 1968, he played a key role in the coup that finally brought the Ba'ath Party to lasting power. This time for good. A new era began. Saddam as the shadow ruler of Iraq, controlling the security services, military, repressive apparatus, and ideological machine. The next part will describe how he rose from second-in-command to an absolute dictator. After the successful coup on July 17, 1968, the Ba'ath Party established itself as Iraq's dominant political force. The formal head of state was Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, Saddam Hussein's relative and mentor. However, over time, all the key levers of power, especially in the fields of security, intelligence, and party control, gradually shifted into Saddam's hands. Within a few years, he became the most powerful person in the country, without a formal title but wielding real authority. He led the Revolutionary Command Council, the body with absolute power. He also controlled the Ministry of Interior, the party apparatus, military discipline, and the growing intelligence services. During this period, Saddam created a repressive machine that would soon envelop the entire country. In the 1970s, he launched a massive campaign to strengthen his cult of personality. His portraits began appearing in schools, offices, hospitals, and military units. All state media became tools for glorifying Comrade Saddam, the devoted son of Iraq, the brave warrior, and the caring leader. History was rewritten. Schoolbooks presented Saddam as a hero of independence, even though at the time he was merely a party operative. People were forced to pledge allegiance to him as if to a god, or risk their lives. Simultaneously, Saddam expanded a vast security network, including the Mukhabarat, the internal security service. Agents infiltrated every sphere, from universities to army units. A mere suspicion of disloyalty could mean torture, disappearance, or public execution. Special attention was given to Kurds, Shiites, and the intelligentsia. The regime created an atmosphere of total fear. Neighbors reported on each other, brothers betrayed brothers, students exposed teachers. During this time, Iraq experienced an economic boom due to soaring oil prices. Saddam used these resources to build a social base. Schools and hospitals were opened, housing was built. But it all came with strict ideological indoctrination. Even medical workers had to pledge loyalty to the Ba'ath Party. In 1975, Iraq signed the Algiers Agreement with Iran, aiming to resolve a long-standing border conflict. But Saddam was already planning to reverse the deal and preparing for a war he would launch a few years later. First, however, he needed to consolidate his power completely. On July 16, 1979, Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, under personal reasons, announced his resignation. Saddam Hussein immediately succeeded him. Formally, a peaceful transition of power. In reality, a well-orchestrated takeover. Just 2 weeks into his presidency, Saddam convened an emergency session of the Ba'ath Party leadership. During a live broadcast, he announced the discovery of a plot within the party. A brutal purge began. During the meeting, guards began removing arrested members of the Central Committee. Most were later tortured, forced to confess, and publicly executed. For the rest, the message was clear. Iraq no longer belonged to the Ba'ath Party. It belonged to Saddam Hussein personally. From this moment on, a new era began. The reign of an absolute dictator, devoid of mercy, doubt, or restraint. The next part will cover the war with Iran and crimes against humanity. On September 22, 1980, Iraq launched an unprovoked invasion of Iran. It marked the beginning of one of the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century, the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted 8 years and claimed over 1 million lives by some estimates. Saddam Hussein believed that post-revolutionary Iran, weakened and chaotic, would collapse quickly. He anticipated a swift victory and hoped to elevate Iraq as the leader of the Arab world. Instead, the war dragged on for years and turned into a brutal stalemate. Saddam framed the war as a holy struggle against Shiite extremism. Every day, state television aired footage of him in military uniform visiting the front lines, promising victory. A wave of patriotic hysteria swept the country. Thousands of students and school children were conscripted into battle. Refusal or dissent often meant imprisonment or execution. Facing fierce resistance, Saddam resorted to scorched earth tactics. For the first time since World War I, chemical weapons were used on a massive scale. Iraqi forces deployed mustard gas, sarin, and other lethal agents against Iranian troops and civilians. These were deliberate acts of war crimes. The international community remained largely silent, due to oil interests, fear of Iran, and geopolitical calculations. The United States, France, and the USSR all supported Saddam in various forms. The most horrifying moment came when Saddam used chemical weapons on his own people. In March 1988, he ordered a gas attack on the Kurdish town of Al-Awja. It was part of a broader campaign known as Anfal, a systematic operation aimed at ethnically cleansing Iraq's Kurdish population. At least 5,000 civilians were killed in Al-Awja, most of them women and children. Victims choked to death in agony, collapsing in streets, homes, and schools. Images of the massacre spread across the world, but no real action followed. Those who could speak remained silent. Those who had power looked away. During the Anfal campaign, approximately 100,000 Kurds were killed. They were labeled enemies of the state and exterminated. Their bodies were dumped into mass graves. Entire Kurdish villages were destroyed, along with residents, livestock, buildings, and even cemeteries. This was genocide, orchestrated as state policy, and personally sanctioned by Saddam Hussein. Amid this horror, Saddam's cult of personality continued to expand. While Kurds were being gassed in the north, massive palaces and golden statues of Saddam were being erected in Baghdad. Books were published glorifying him as the new salamander, son of Adam, and messiah of the Arab world. Students were taught to recite his speeches. University theses focused on the great ideas of Comrade Saddam. He became a national idol. The state became a cult. The war ended on August 20, 1988, with a ceasefire. Neither side claimed victory. Iraq was economically devastated, hundreds of thousands of lives lost. Yet Saddam declared it a historic triumph. He admitted no mistakes. On the contrary, his paranoia, cruelty, and appetite for violence only intensified. The next part will cover the invasion of Kuwait, confrontation with the U.S., and the next phase of catastrophe. In July 1990, just 2 years after the end of the Iran-Iraq War, Saddam Hussein faced a new crisis: economic collapse. Iraq was buried in debt, infrastructure was shattered, and the vast security apparatus required constant funding. Saddam blamed Kuwait for Iraq's troubles, accusing the small, oil-rich neighbor of overproducing oil and driving down prices, allegedly as part of a conspiracy to weaken Iraq. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi troops invaded Kuwait. Within hours, the country was completely occupied. Saddam declared it Iraq's 19th province. It was a blatant act of aggression, violating every principle of international law. But the dictator believed the world would stay silent, just as it had during his use of chemical weapons or the annexation of Kurdish lands. This time, however, he miscalculated. The United Nations swiftly condemned the invasion. The United States, the UK, France, Saudi Arabia, and others began forming a military coalition. Saddam responded with defiance. He paraded captured foreign nationals, men, women, and children, on television, using them as human shields at military sites. The world braced for war. On January 16, 1991, Operation Desert Storm began. In a few weeks, coalition forces launched a devastating air campaign, destroying Iraq's military infrastructure, air force, weapons depots, and industrial capacity. It was one of the largest aerial bombardments since World War II. Iraqi forces in Kuwait were no match for the coalition's advanced technology. On February 24, the ground offensive began. Within 4 days, Kuwait was liberated. Iraq was humiliated. Saddam was forced to accept a ceasefire. Yet his regime did not fall. In fact, right after the defeat, he unleashed a wave of internal repression on an unprecedented scale. In March 1991, mass uprisings erupted across Iraq, Shia in the south, Kurds in the north. People believed Saddam was weakened and hoped for Western support. But the U.S. did not intervene. Saddam unleashed his Republican Guard, tanks, and aircraft against his own citizens. Cities were bombarded. Shia shrines shelled. Kurds were driven into the mountains. Tens of thousands were killed. Mass graves returned. Unable to topple the regime directly, the international community imposed sanctions. The UN enforced a strict embargo. Oil exports were frozen. The economy collapsed. But the elite remained untouched. The people starved. Pharmacies were empty. Children died from lack of medicine. The regime blamed the West while looting humanitarian aid. In 1996, the Oil for Food program was launched, a last-ditch effort to prevent mass famine. This period marked the moral nadir of Saddam's rule. Iraq became a giant prison. A single word against the leader meant death. Torture, executions, and disappearances became routine. Saddam's son Uday gained notoriety as a sadist, accused of rape, murder, and torture of athletes and students. Fear became the national currency. Saddam remained in power. But behind the facade of calm lay paranoia and fragile control. The next part will explore the final years of his regime, the U.S. invasion, and the fall of the dictator. After 1996, Saddam Hussein's regime existed under the weight of international sanctions, economic collapse, and growing internal paranoia. UN sanctions remained in place. Living standards plummeted, child mortality soared, and Iraq's education and healthcare systems were in ruins. Yet the cult of Saddam thrived. Schools still required students to memorize his speeches. In mosques, people prayed for his health. On the streets, his portraits. In the media, only him. Domestically, the regime continued to rule through terror. Intelligence agencies tapped phones, tracked families, and eliminated dissenters. Any sign of disloyalty meant prison or death. Families of executed prisoners had to pay for the bullet. Stories of torture, acid baths, public punishments, and ghost prisons were not rumors. They were daily reality. Meanwhile, international pressure grew. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, the U.S. shifted its focus to Iraq. President George W. Bush labeled Iraq part of the axis of evil and accused Saddam's regime of producing weapons of mass destruction. Despite lacking solid evidence, preparations for war accelerated in 2002 and early 2003. On March 19, 2003, the U.S. and its allies launched the invasion of Iraq. Within 3 weeks, on April 9, Baghdad fell. The toppling of Saddam's statue in Firdo Square became a global symbol. Saddam himself disappeared. The manhunt began. On December 13, 2003, U.S. forces captured Saddam near Tikrit. He was found hiding in an underground bunker, not in a palace, but in a hole in the ground. He was unarmed, disheveled, with an overgrown beard. The once mighty tyrant was shown to the world as a captured man. From that moment on, he was a prisoner of war. In 2005, Saddam's trial began. It wasn't The Hague, it was a special Iraqi tribunal. He was charged with crimes against humanity, the genocide of Kurds, and the mass killing of Shia civilians. During the trial, Saddam remained defiant. He yelled, rejected the court's legitimacy, and accused the U.S. of aggression. But witness testimony, documents, and facts were damning. Accounts of executions, gas attacks, and torture filled the courtroom. His victims, living and dead, testified. On November 5, 2006, Saddam was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. On December 30, 2006, at dawn, the sentence was carried out. A mobile phone video leaked online. It showed Saddam with a noose around his neck, dressed in black, surrounded by Shia men shouting the names of the dead. Moments later, he was gone. Thus ended the life of a dictator who ruled a nation through fear. But Saddam Hussein's legacy did not die with him. He left behind a fractured country, millions of dead, a shattered system, a culture of violence, and deep distrust among communities. On the ruins of his regime, a new disaster would emerge: civil war, terrorism, ISIS. But that is another story. After 1998, Saddam Hussein's regime became a fully isolated, paranoid dictatorship dominated by censorship, surveillance, and a leader increasingly suspicious of even his closest allies. Although the oil-for-food program offered some relief, the economy continued its decline. In the provinces, hunger spread, crime increased, but the security services crushed any signs of dissent. Having lost trust in the Ba'ath Party elites, Saddam relied more and more on his family, especially his sons, Uday and Qusay. They became living symbols of brutality. Uday, the older son, was impulsive and sadistic. Even ministers feared him. He was known to kill for a glance, a word, or a refusal. His entertainment included kidnapping women off the streets, torturing athletes, and humiliating generals. Foreign diplomats privately described him as a feral predator. Qusay, the younger son, was quieter but no less ruthless. He oversaw internal security, the mukhabarat, and secret police. He commanded the prisons where thousands disappeared. He created special squads for night arrests, extrajudicial executions, and the purge of disloyals. Saddam turned Iraq into a family dictatorship. All key posts were held by relatives from the al-Majid clan. Even city mayors and army commanders were either blood relatives or bound by personal loyalty. Everyone else was a potential enemy. No independent institution remained, only fear and obedience. Meanwhile, Saddam staged an illusion of military strength. Although there were no real weapons of mass destruction, the regime deliberately pretended to possess them. It was a calculated bluff, to maintain global tension and preserve Saddam's image as an untouchable strongman. But the bluff became a trap. In 2002, UN inspectors returned to Iraq. They found no evidence of WMDs, but the U.S. had already made its decision. Under the banner of liberating Iraq, President George W. Bush announced a military campaign. Saddam, though preparing defenses, knew this was no repeat of the Iran war. This time, he was the primary target. In the final months before the invasion, tension gripped Baghdad. The army was rotting from within, morale was gone, and commanders lacked belief in victory. Yet Saddam continued to appear on television. In uniform, holding a rifle, surrounded by children, reciting poems about Arab victory. It was the regime's televised death throes. On March 19, 2003, the invasion began. Iraq offered no real resistance. The regime collapsed like a house of cards. In many cities, soldiers abandoned their posts without a fight. People torched BIDH offices, tore down portraits. Iraq was not willing to die for Saddam. Within weeks, it was over. Saddam was on the run. The country plunged into chaos. A new era began, but its roots were in his regime. Everything that came after was born from decades of violence he created. After Saddam Hussein's execution on December 30, 2006, Iraq did not become a free country. It descended into a new phase of violence, chaos, and sectarian bloodshed. What had been suppressed for decades under the dictator's iron grip now erupted uncontrollably. Sunnis, Shiites, Kurds, tribal factions, all fought for power, survival, and dominance. The Ba'athist system did not vanish overnight. Many members of the old elite fled abroad or went underground. Some became the backbone of the armed resistance, the Iraqi insurgency. Former officers, political operatives, and commanders of the Republican Guard joined forces with jihadists, using the expertise they gained under Saddam to build underground networks. On the ruins of dictatorship, a new monster emerged, the Islamic State of Iraq, later known to the world as ISIS. The U.S.-led liberation devolved into a long and bloody occupation. Daily bombings, mass killings, ethnic cleansing, and civilian massacres. Government institutions were fragile. The economy collapsed. The Iraqi people were trapped between the remnants of the old regime, a corrupt new leadership, and religious extremism. The post-Saddam political system was like a structure without a foundation. Democratic elections could not guarantee security or justice. Each successive government wavered between U.S. dependence, Iranian influence, and internal violence. No Iraqi leader after Saddam held absolute power, yet none could stop the bloodshed. Iraqi society remained deeply scarred. For many, Saddam Hussein was a symbol of evil, a tyrant, a butcher. For others, he was the last ruler who kept the country from falling apart. His portraits still hang in some Sunni villages. His name is sometimes spoken with nostalgia, as a symbol of the strong hand, without understanding the real cost of that stability. Saddam's legacy is not just a ruined country. It's a culture of fear that seeped into generations. It's lost education, looted museums, millions of lives shattered by war, tyranny, and betrayal. It's a nation that could have become modern, but became a battlefield. Saddam Hussein was not just a dictator. He was the architect of a system where fear was the engine, truth a luxury, and death a political tool. His rule is a warning to everyone, because tyranny doesn't begin with prisons or gas. It begins with silence, with apathy, with the worship of a face.